Hey Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share, leave your comments. It helps me create better content. Today's is a perfect example. Somebody from YouTube reached out and said, hey, can you do a video on integrating community-based care, healthcare with clinical research? And I've talked about this all the time, but how do you integrate? This is very much needed in our industry. So many issues stem from the lack of consistent patient recruitment. You've obviously got implications on timelines for sponsors, but it stems further than that. It's got diversity implications too. We only have a certain amount of demographics participating in studies. We don't have other groups not participating, and a lot of this is due to the fact that we don't have enough community-based research going on. So I think that's changing, and I think like the social media and all this stuff, I'm happy to have like a small role in that, but it's the only way. The way I understand it's the only way to actually successfully start a research clinic is to combine it with community-based care. So ideally you want a research naive MD or DO, so a clinician, to partner with you. Now maybe you are that clinician, maybe you're a nurse practitioner, maybe you're a physician assistant, maybe you are the MD themselves. If you're not the MD, if you're an NP or a PA, you're still going to need an MD. And I know you're going to say, well, show me where the FDA says you need an MD to be a PI. And you're right, you won't find it. But remember, sponsors, they're paying for it, right? They're paying the sites for their studies, so they're very careful about who they select to be a PI. So for the most part, almost always, sponsors want an MD or a DO to be their PI. Now, I've seen nurse practitioners be PIs, I've seen PAs be PIs, but that is the exception, not the norm, and that is only after like 20 years of experience on their resumes. And even then, it doesn't happen all the time for them. So your best bet, if you're building a business and want to get serious about it, is to partner with an MD. If you are that MD, perfect. If you're the NP or PA or just a business person like myself, time to start finding some PIs. And this is exactly what I did when I moved out here to Yuma, Arizona. I found one PI who was interested. I'm integrated into his clinic. He referred me to a dermatologist specialist. He was interested. I'm integrating in his clinic. Now I just went out, and because I was able to hire 2 coordinators, it frees up some of my time. I went out and found a neurologist. I'm embedding myself in his practice, and I'm going to keep doing that because I think it makes a lot of sense. So that's the first thing. You need to find the treating clinician. Find the treating group. The big medical groups will not work. So if they're owned by a large healthcare system. Now, Brad Hightower, my colleague in Oklahoma City, he's actually proved me wrong because he has integrated himself into some large hospital systems. So it's possible. I just don't have experience doing that. I always stick to, like, I don't even try to approach those large hospital systems. And maybe I should. I mean, I just haven't done it yet. But I've worked with the smaller ones. Typically, it's just easier to work with the smaller medical practices. And that's exactly what I've done time and time again throughout my career. So these clinicians, initially they're somewhat skeptical about research. So it's up to you. Look at yourself like the ambassador to research for your community. So you go in there, and your job literally as the coordinator, whatever it is, the business person, the site owner, is to make their lives, the clinicians' lives, as easy as possible. And you don't necessarily want them changing their day-to-day activities. Like my doctor, I get much more value from my doctors continuing to see their patients because I know that funnels patients to the research with them. Now, of course, you need PI oversight, so you need to streamline the workflow for the research to make it easy for them to do it. And we've managed to be able to do that using eSource, eReg, coordinators just being ingrained in their offices. I think our next step is that, because we're running out of space, and that's one of the downsides of embedding yourself in a medical practice, is you run out of space, because research requires a lot of space. Ultimately, initially you can get away with just like a small room in a doctor's office, but as soon as you start getting 4, 5, 6 studies or more, those boxes, those lab kits, all that equipment that the sponsors send you for every study starts stacking up, right? The e-source helps, the e-reg helps, but you still have a redundancy of papers in many cases. So eventually you need your own office, but in the beginning, you should try to find a workspace in the doctor's private practice or very close by. Both will work. It's just a matter of the PI and your communication with them as far as expectations for them and what it means to be a PI. So monitoring visits is probably the one thing that they're not used to. So seeing patients, whether it's for research or for their private practice, it could be this, not very much different. You're keeping patients safe at the end of the day, and you're documenting, which they already do in private practice. So it's not very different in research, although every protocol is different. But probably the one thing they're not used to is dealing with monitors. And again, your job as a site owner, site director, is to make sure that either you, if you're the coordinator, or your coordinators that you've hired are making life easy for the PI by following up on queries, deviations, IP accountability, IP temperature. Like, the PIs don't need to concern themselves with these kind of things. They need to be aware of it, but they don't necessarily, you don't want to give them more stress. And the money, everyone thinks the money in clinical research starts flowing right away. That doesn't happen. It takes at least a year. At least a year, if things go right, for the money, the revenue that you bring in to start being significant for the PIs, for them to start actually getting excited about it. So initially, you have to excite them on the idea. And then for that first year, you have to continue to instill excitement in them throughout the process of site selection visit, site initiation visit, and figure out a way to make it worth their while. I know some site owners pay their PIs hourly. I know others pay them based on events that happen. I start out paying my PI a percentage of the study budget as I get the payment. I just cut them a percentage. I've done that, and then later I've switched them to be equity partners if that's what they want. But not everyone wants that. So there are pros and cons to that on both sides, and there's separate videos for that. But this is basically like how you do the community-based care. Once you are embedded with a treating clinician that wants to do research, the first thing you got to do is find a study, right? And that first study is going to be tough to find. It's the hardest one. Why? Because the sponsors, they know, okay, this PI is a little bit risky. He or she's a new PI. We don't know much about them. However, we need patients for this study. And they seem to have patients for this study. So we're going to give them a chance. And maybe this is where your coordinator is going to come in. This is where you as the site director are going to be a huge selling point to the sponsor for that site selection visit. After that first study, make sure you do a good job on that study. Look through the PI's database regularly. Communicate with the other clinicians that may not be as interested in research as the main PI that you partnered with. Regular communication with them. Maybe communicate with external providers that the PI is colleagues with as far as referrals. So it's a lot. Your role for that first study is going to be really challenging because you're facing the biggest issue in research, which is patient recruitment. Now, interestingly enough, and I don't know how this happens, but once you get that first study, the second and third and fourth ones become a lot easier. And then the word starts getting out in the community amongst other clinicians, especially if it's a smaller town, that hey, these guys are doing research. How can I do research? This is when you're going to start getting specialists in the community interested. Talk to your PI about that. In my case with Yuma Clinical Trials, my PI, the internal medicine physician, he bought into my idea of the vision of partnering with as many specialists as we can in this area, and he's going to get a piece of all that action as far as equity in the actual company. Others won't, and don't try to sell somebody who's unsellable. Just keep working with them either as independent contractor and let them eventually see that this is something worth their while. If it's worth their while, they're going to naturally get more interested. A lot of these private community-based clinicians are also business people at the end of the day. I mean, that's the whole, they are a business person already by having a private practice. They're not an employee for a hospital system. They're not an employee for someone else. They work for themselves, so they naturally see research as potentially good. They just don't want to waste their time with it if there's nothing going on there, or if there's a lot of paperwork and there's just no ROI for them. So it's a lot of selling at the beginning. I really look at myself as an ambassador to clinical research for a lot of these physicians in my community. Once you start recruiting patients, it's where it gets interesting, because after a few years of this consistently, and studies will just keep coming. It just becomes easier to get studies, and then you may have other specialists wanting to work with you guys. Your PIs might be thinking, all right, well, how do we double down on doing research? And we've had a few clients, I've interviewed a few clients, MDs, who started out, they were the PI with private practice and then research associated with it. Research was so lucrative to them that they wanted to just stop their private practice altogether, and in some cases, some of them did. But guess what? You still need access to community-based clinicians in that case. So they have just become site owners now, and their colleagues are the referral sources. So there's a lot of ways to model and integrate and execute community-based research in a community. And this is just the model that I've come up with. I didn't even come up with it. It's just something I started doing. It started out emulating from others before me. Now you have integrative research organization, IROs, you have site networks, you have a lot of smaller research sites or physicians kind of joining forces nationwide to make it easier to get studies and negotiate budgets and all that stuff. We have our own DSCS site network where we have probably 85 clients at any given time across the country. We help find them studies, we help do their budgets, we help with the source docs, we help with the regulatory process. A lot of these sites are newer. Even the more established sites, they still need to outsource a lot of this stuff, because biz dev, business development, you could never ignore. Contracts and budgets, you should never ignore. You don't want to leave money on the table when it comes to sponsorship. So this is how you start a community-based research center, but then the way you grow and continue to expand it, that needs another video on its own. So hopefully this helps. There's more than one way to do it. Like I said, Brad Hightower has managed to do this not only with small community-based clinics, but also with large hospital-based systems. So he's definitely worth a follow on LinkedIn. And let me know what you've done in the comments below. And if you need help with any of this, my site network could help. Just text me 949-415-6256 or message me anywhere. Talk to you soon, Guru Nation. Thank you so much. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Bye-bye.